So before I begin, I really want to thank NCCC for its support over the years, which has made it possible to track down and digitise a lot of important material and put on heritage walks and exhibitions. And ultimately, that's resulted in the Joint Heritage nomination, which is due to go to the ACT Heritage Council in 8 days. I wanted to share some of the history of the original aerodrome and tell the story of the first aviation disaster in the Territory. I'm happy to take questions at the end. The slideshow goes for 15 minutes, so that's what I'd understood we'd have to play with. On Thursday, the 11th of February 1926, a two-seat DH-9 biplane of number 3 Squadron RAAF flew here from Richmond. Its mission was to carry out aerial photography for a survey of the Murrumbidgee Valley. That plane crashed during its final approach to the landing ground, erupted into flames, and its 2 Air Force crew members, aged 25 and 26, were killed. Now, what's not happening here is it should be, there we go, going to the next slide. The aerodrome covered most of the land in the suburb of Dickson and stretched between what are now Dickson Library and Darramallan across to the playing fields, totaling 70 hectares. The actual landing ground took in all of what are now the wetlands, the eastern half of what's now the Section 72 Community Precinct, the western third of the playing fields, and several suburban streets. So, the nomination focuses on 3 historic landing ground structures that we believe still exist just below the surface of public land as archaeological remains. The first and largest is the central concrete ring, roughly 70 metres west of the cul-de-sac of Horden Place. It was a 60-foot diameter whitewashed object designed to be visible from a long way up in the air. That's 18 metres, and we're proposing a small buffer around that to minimise any conflict with the common ground community housing development. So this is where the southeast lock spit was, near Dickson Wetlands and Dutton Street. The lock spits were made up of 2 long concrete arms, roughly 22 feet long, that marked the corners of the landing ground. There's open space all around this, and it's in a corner, so getting in will be much easier. And this is where the northeast lock spit was, near Anthill Street and the changing rooms. These would all have been flush with ground level, so pilots could land and take off without any interference. Here is a section of what we believe to be one of the lock spits, still faintly visible in the grass when the conditions are just right. And this is the earliest photo we have showing the future site of the aerodrome. What you're looking at was one of the earliest civil aircraft to be registered in the whole of Australia. It was purchased for the newly formed Civil Aviation Branch in 1921, was flown here from Melbourne in February 1923, so that Colonel Owen could inspect the proposed site of the first Canberra aerodrome. That's Dickson. This and the next photo are 2 of a fairly large series taken in 1925, when aerial survey missions were regularly being flown from the aerodrome using RAF de Havilland DH-9s from Richmond, working for the Federal Capital Commission. This one shows that same plane taking off to the west. And this was taken over a year later and was a civilian flight. The man on the left was the pilot, Captain Edgar Percival, who went on to set up the Percival Aircraft Company in the UK, became the first Australian entrepreneur to design and manufacture aircraft internationally. Those are the lower slopes of Mount Majura in the background. So these are all photos from the National Archives that hadn't been catalogued correctly and were taken at Canberra's original aerodrome in Dickson by W.J. Mildenhall, a gifted amateur photographer who worked as a clerk. They form part of a special Mildenhall collection in Moad, made up of about 7,700 photos of Canberra. The plan for the aerodrome goes all the way back to Griffin. Griffin's final plan and blueprint for Canberra incorporated an aerodrome north of Majura Avenue in the industrial area next to what was meant to be a railway station where the ABC studios are now. That was drawn up in 1918. The land selected for the aerodrome has its own very interesting history. This was, of course, all Ngunnawal land that became part of Campbell's Duntroon estate in 1838 and then was resumed by the Commonwealth in 1911. At the end of World War I in 1919, a soldier settlement scheme was announced and the industrial area Griffin had shown on the blueprint was promptly carved up with a subdivision. The best and largest of the first 9 new blocks in Griffin's industrial area was granted to Edward Shumack. That was Block 98I and covered 459 acres north of Majura Avenue. Shumack came from a respected local farming family, owned a homestead close to St Ninian's Church and the Old Yass Road in what's now Lynham before he enlisted. His property ran right to where Dickson Library is now. The soldier settlement block was immediately adjacent to that and took in most of the rest of Dickson and a large part of Downer. While Shumack was busy signing the papers for his new block, a young Army cadet was making a name for himself at the Royal Military College Duntroon. Philip Mackenzie Pitt, nicknamed Peter, shown here, had moved from Queensland when he was 17. He was Duntroon's champion athlete and a rugby player, shown here with his teammates. He was later seconded to the Air Force and trained to fly at Point Cook during 1925. So Canberra Aerodrome was approved by the Minister for Works and Railways in May 1923 after a lot of lobbying by the Department of Defence. The lower third of Shumack's block was reserved for the aerodrome. The aerodrome officially opened in March 1924 on the outskirts of the city next to Majura Avenue, just east of the Old Yass Road and the Old Weetangara Road, shown here as brown lines. I'm not sure if you can see those. We know from a detailed survey in 1926, which the Federal Capital Commission undertook, that it was fairly basic. There was a windsock, 4 large concrete lock spits that marked the 4 corners of the landing ground, and a very large whitewashed concrete ring in the middle that guided pilots into land. Amazingly, aerial photos from 1950 and 1958 show part of that ring was still intact more than 30 years later when the stormwater channel was being built. That central ring and the 2 eastern lock spits are the subject of the nomination because we found scattered surface fragments and a portion of one of the lock spits, all on public land, and have good reason to believe that they were covered with a layer of soil when the stormwater channel was being dug out. The purpose of the nomination is to protect whatever is left, investigate it properly, and begin to tell the stories of what was once there. Parliament was still sitting in Melbourne during those years. There were no scheduled services to the city. It would have been used by occasional military flights and private aviators, and was an emergency landing site for the very first commercial passenger services between Sydney and Adelaide. However, that all changed in 1925 when the Federal Capital Commission was formed. In the second half of 1925, the Air Force's No. 3 Squadron sent more than 30 missions to Canberra in order to carry out aerial surveys for the Federal Capital Commission and use the very latest technology for map making and infrastructure planning. Their first mission to Canberra in 1926 was scheduled for Thursday, the 11th of February. 2 DH-9s were dispatched from Richmond, meant to rendezvous at the Canberra Aerodrome at 10:30. The second was piloted by flying rugby player, accompanied by his photographer, William Callender, in the rear cockpit. Tragedy struck as Pitt turned to make his final approach to the aerodrome. His DH-9 stalled at low altitude and nosedived, crashing into the ground and bursting into flames. Watching from Shumack's paddock was the local ploughman Walter Johnson, seen here. As soon as he saw the plane go down, he leapt the fence and raced over to try to rescue the men, managing to drag Callender out to safety. By the time he ran back, the flames made it impossible to reach the pilot, who had been killed on impact. Callender died of severe injuries and burns at the hospital at Acton that evening, attended by Dr. John James. All of these photos had been catalogued incorrectly, so until we started working on this, there was no photographic record of the aerodrome or the crash. The history had become vague and was largely forgotten. Mildenhall's photos were widely published in the press and have been beautifully preserved in the National Archives. Getting them digitized to high resolution has allowed us to triangulate the location of the crash to within a few meters. This was the ACT's first fatal aviation accident. It was noted in Hansard that same night and newspapers nationwide. It triggered a major inquiry and I'm told is still studied by the Air Force's No. 3 Squadron to this day. Elaborate military funerals with full honours were held for the victims on the Saturday and Sunday. Witnesses to the formal RAF inquiry all testified that the likely cause of the accident was simple pilot error. The ploughman Walter Johnson was awarded a bravery medal and certificate for his heroic rescue efforts. But despite the pomp and ceremony of the funerals, no official gravestones were erected for these two peacetime casualties. Pitt was buried at Queanbeyan's Catholic Cemetery. Callender was buried in St. John's Churchyard at Reed. Unfortunately, the plaque put there by the church 10 years ago contains errors. Near the end of 1926, a number of things suddenly happened. The FCC, Federal Capital Commission, surveyed the aerodrome to a high level of precision and showed sites to the east of that in Dickson for future leases, but the Department of Defence was under a lot of pressure to get ready for the opening of Parliament House with a big flyover, and couldn't get the Federal Capital Commission to agree to a 99-year lease. So they abandoned the original aerodrome and transferred all their operations to an alternative site that had been deemed less suitable in Majura Valley. It took Defence several more years of wrangling, but they finally got the 99-year lease they needed to put up a hangar. Canberra's current airport has grown from this. The original aerodrome at Dickson reverted to sheep grazing. Schumacher eventually sold his land and moved to Cowra, and most of the soldier settlement block passed to the CSIRO in 1940 for the city's first agricultural experiment station, which you can see here looking down Horden Street. By 1958, the first Dickson houses were being built, and by the middle of 1959, most of the former aerodrome was being dug up for roadworks and residential subdivision. The aerodrome was publicly commemorated by a small plaque at Dickson Library in the 1980s. Unfortunately, both the name of the aerodrome and the crash date shown on it are wrong. There are no Canberra track signs anywhere to explain what used to be here or where that was. Most people have never even seen the plaque because what's there is so small and dark and easy to miss. Apart from the official survey and Mildenhall's photos, the most significant relic of the crash is a brass object displayed by the Canberra and District Historical Society in Curtin. This was the bomb site frame of the DH-9 that crashed. It was located directly on the cockpit floor between the pilot's feet. A lot has happened since we gave our talk at a national conference last November. Tim the Yowie Man wrote the story up for the Canberra Times in January. I've located the original bravery certificate and bronze medal that Walter Johnson was awarded out at Gundaroo and spoken to his relatives. The Canberra Historical Journal published my research in March, and a trip to the Duntroon Army Museum turned up this beautiful photo of him. This would have been taken around the time of his graduation from Duntroon in 1920. On the right is his obituary, which is up on Trove. We've begun making calls to trace Pitt and Callender's relatives so we can secure the permissions we need to get the headstone organised at Queanbeyan and replace the 40 plaque at St. John's. We put together the Heritage nomination, did a story for the ABC, and have begun talking to the ANU's Archaeology Department about using ground-penetrating radar to map the remnants that we believe are still there, less than 1 metre below ground. Today, a rare original DH9 is on display here in Canberra at the War Memorial, if you want to see one, in the Anzac Hall, interestingly. A development application for a 6-storey building on the now vacant site at the centre of the former landing ground was lodged with ACPLA in late December, publicly notified 95 days later in March when the COVID crisis was first unfolding, and a separate development application for servicing that project was lodged in late May without any consultation. So we've put comments in on both of those, flagging concerns that the remnants still need to be properly investigated. No decision has been announced yet on those 2 DAs, but a tender process went ahead nevertheless and closed at the end of June. So an announcement of some sort is imminent. The beauty of the nomination is that it's possible to redevelop without destroying any archaeological remains, so long as they're identified. And there's enough room allowed around them as a buffer. We're hoping to work with the Heritage Council. We'll know next Friday what they've decided. And finally, for anyone who's interested in the history of aviation, on Friday this week, the 17th of July, will be exactly 100 years since the very first recorded flight landed in Canberra at Duntroon in July 1920. The very earliest flights used their football field. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
That's it for me.
Jane, for this gripping tale. Any questions?
Thanks.
Everybody seems to be muted. Marcus.
I believe people can unmute themselves if they wish. They just need to click on the.
You just have to press your space bar as a
space bar. Okay. Yes.
So, Jane,
I'm guessing that means we don't have any questions?
Immediate that you think NCCC can do to support this project?
The truth is, we've tried to get a meeting with the Minister, Minister for Heritage and Planning and Urban Renewal, of course, is Mick Gentleman. I got a call today to say he would prefer not to meet while there are 2 live DAs affecting Block 25, Section 72, which of course is where a portion of the concrete ring sits. So that's obviously on hold.
So, I mean, the whole point is to have this recognized. So the argument that there are live DAs that hinder him to listen to this is not very convincing.
It does seem very strange.
So what avenues do you see we could have?
I spoke today with the former Chief of Air Force, who is interested in helping in any way he can. And at this stage, we think the logical thing is to wait until the Heritage Council meets next week and find out one way or the other if they accept the nomination or if they don't. Okay.
Everybody on my screen is muted. Do you want to say something?
This is Neil here. I thought it was really interesting. Thank you, Jane. I thought it was fascinating.
Thanks.
Jane, this is Rebecca. here. I was just interested in relation. Oh, sorry, I came in a tiny bit late, so I hope you haven't answered this question. Just in relation to the Heritage Council's decision, how might that impact on the process that's running at the moment, if it's particularly if it was accepted?
There are 3 hurdles in the process of heritage listing. So the very first is to have your nomination accepted. At that point, they then undertake research and assessment. But of course, what happens in practice is it joins a very long queue of other heritage nominations and goes to the back of the queue, unless members of the Heritage Council decide to give it extra priority. So of course, at the point where the Heritage Council meets next week, we hope that they'll accept the nomination, and then it joins the queue. And that's when we start working on trying to change its priority listing. The important thing about the nomination being accepted is that it then has to be factored in. And of course, that means recognising the heritage values that are associated with the nomination.
Thank you.
It's Bruce here. I'm just wondering about, it sounds like if the nomination went ahead and got approved and everything, that it would have a relatively minimal impact on Section 72 if the common ground thing proceeded. That seemed to be what you were saying before.
Yes, and I think that's right. I think what the logical thing, I don't know if anybody here remembers draft variation 367 that rezoned the Block 25 Section 72 in Dickson. That's now part of the Dickson Precinct Code. And what that provides for is a 13-metre southern setback. The beauty is that the concrete ring lies inside that southern setback. And so it's actually quite simple for whoever ends up redeveloping the site to put in place an archaeological finds protocol, and then any excavation that's being done on site in order to relocate the electricity substation and the power poles that are there would be done in the presence of an archaeologist, so that if they then discover, that they're actually digging up part of the concrete ring, they can then record exactly where it was, and that can all be preserved properly, which is, perfectly adequate. So it's not as if you have to leave it in the ground in order for it to actually have heritage value. It can actually be more useful to dig it up and put part of it in the Canberra Museum and Gallery and put up a sign to show that that's where it used to be.
Okay. Look, folks, we need to move on, but we will return to this in the NCCC part of the meeting at the end, because Paul Costigan had some really nice ideas how to also make people aware of that history. So if there are no urgent questions now to Jane, could I ask the Transport Canberra to Peter Steele to give us his presentation?
Good evening, how are you?
Not too bad so far.
Thank you for having me. I'd shared my, just so you know, I'd shared my presentation with Chris. I've sent that along to you if you were able to share it for me.
Yes, I should be able to do that on the second.
Thank you, mate.
Hang on, Marcus. I might need to just send it to you, because I think I sent you the other presentation. So
oh, you did, yes. Well. No, sorry, I've only got the Dickson.
Looks like you came by bus, Peter.
Just my little just background there,
Marcus.
Chris. I'm just for everybody. I'm actually I'm looking particularly casual. I'm one of the very last TCCS employees in the building at 496 Northmont Avenue. We're all moving to the new building at 480, which is just next to the Dickson Interchange. So this will be probably the last community council I do from here. If you're a bit of trivia.
Okay, well, thanks for coming tonight. I think the presentation should be coming up soon. And if anyone has any questions during the presentation, I was just going to say, obviously with the chat option, you can just type in questions as we go, and I'm sure they can be asked at the end.
Can I just ask, if it's okay, I'll go through the presentation. I've left some space at the end to take questions.
Yeah.
I think I've just seen Leon's popped up a thing. We'll share. I mean, you've got a copy of the presentation, but we're happy to share it with you as well, so you can distribute it to anyone that you want to give it to.
Okay, I'm just sharing my screen now. And I believe it's here. Is that it? Yeah. Sorry, that's not working. Is that good? Can you hear me?
Yes, so that looks very good to me. I hope for everybody else.
Yep.
And sorry, that means you won't see me while I'm presenting, but that's fine. If you want to just pop through, Chris, I'll just give you a nod to move on, if that's okay. So just to kick off, I would note too, by the way, that was a very interesting presentation about the history of the area there. I've heard about airfields in the north, but that's the most detail I've ever seen on it. Again, thanks for everybody for having me this evening. My name is Peter Steele. I'm the Senior Director of Operational Planning for Transport Canberra. What I'm here to talk to you tonight is about the bus network update that's commencing from actually this Saturday, the 18th of July. It has been put off for us because of the whole COVID impact, and I'll give you a little bit of background on what that means for us at Transport Canberra. But really starting things off is that I'm sure that everybody's well aware that we undertook a real once-in-a-generational transport change in 2019, of course, with the introduction of the first light rail services in Canberra. Very prominent in this part of the city, of course, and along with that as a complementary bus network redesign. We've put a lot of work in speaking with the community, communities, schools, parents, our customers since that time, taking both data in, but also having conversations about how the network works for people, how it doesn't, and what we can do about that. So a lot of what we've done here for the 18th has really come back from really good conversations with the community, and it's been a very good experience. Sorry, next one. I just wanted to show this. This is a slide I think it's really interesting to let everybody understand what COVID has meant for transport in the ACT. What that line's showing you is that from the 2018, 18, 19, we were projecting to grow from 14.4 million journeys, 15.3, 16.5, so continually increasing. What we're finding though with the COVID, and we are having people come back to transport, is that we're going to be about 3.9 million journeys less than we originally predicted. You can see that around March 16th, if everybody recalls, and it seems like we've been this way for a while, but that's when the lockdowns really started to come into place, and straight away we saw that big change for us. And you can see it's coming back a little bit, but unfortunately we're, from a transport perspective, as we've moved back to essential travel, of course we're not seeing that on the network. But just a little bit of context for everybody. So next one, thanks. So what's changing now, as I said, the Sunday the 18th of July, we'll have the new network kick off. What that means is we've got some changes to rapid and local bus routes, and the route changes are continue to be 7 days a week. We've got some extra services on route, and actually quite a substantial amount, and I'll touch on that again. And we've also got some targeting improvements for schools, very much coming out of the consultation that we've had with the schools and the school communities. Next one. We're really trying to service that. The idea of the network is to provide a lot more service, and that's what we continue to focus on. But we tried to stick with some really key things that mean a lot to the people who use our service, is making them faster, running them more frequently, simpler, easy to use, better connected, and some school changes. Not every region in the city has every one of these items, but it is a pretty consistent theme that we've tried to follow through the network. As I said, there's some changes through the network where we've got travel time improvements because we've been able to optimise how our services run. But the really big thing is that there'll be 692 extra bus services each weekday. And you see there's 17.5% increase on the current timetable. It's very much about bringing all services during the day to half hourly, making it much easier for people to travel during the day. So next one. For the inner north, I've said inner north, North Canberra. Travel time savings. So the Rapid 9 is one of those buses that when we look at it, we can make the travel time quicker by optimising our schedule there. I will touch on this as well, even though I very much come from the bus side, but there are more light rail services with peak frequencies extending and the headways improving to every 5 minutes for the peak. And a lot of that has got to do with that we know that rail was very popular before. Yes, we've got the COVID reductions now. However, we know by putting more service on, we're providing that extra space that people require at the moment. And it also positions us that hopefully, and not too far from now, when we're in a position to welcome people back to public transport, we've got the service levels that we require to do that. So that's the position that we're in. A big one for this area too is moving the Route 18 will now come down to the Dickson Interchange. So Dickson Interchange continues to build to be a really important part of the network. The new office block that I'm moving into is opening, as are the other buildings. So that transit orientated development's coming along. Moving that 18 to run down to Dickson means a lot of people can come to Dickson and make their way into Mitchell. We've got a lot of conversations with the Mitchell Traders Association and areas around there. So that'll help people get into Mitchell and by coming through Dickson and using the Dickson Interchange. Another thing for everybody is that the light rail services will be starting earlier on Sundays. At the moment, the first trip is at 8 a.m. From the 18th, they'll be starting at 7 a.m. So just a helpful little thing that we've heard from people is that they need the services to start early on the weekends, and that'll be coming into effect. Just next one, thanks. With the school services, just noting here, there's quite a lot across the network. This is just a bit of a flavour of some of the things that have happened. We've got some additional school services throughout the city. We're putting more services on, not just school specials, but because the vast majority of students travel in our, what we would call our general or commuter network. So more rapid 6 services coming through Narrabonda College when they really need it to pick up the kids. We're also doing something, probably one of the, it might seem like a small thing, but we think it'll be a real beneficial thing, and came through conversations, is reopening a bus stop on Northwood Avenue opposite the Dickson Interchange, which will mean that students coming out to catch buses from Lyneham High won't need to make the trip across Northwood Avenue and into the Dickson Interchange. They'll be able to stay on that side of the road. So when we have these conversations with the community, it helps us really make simple changes that can really provide a lot of benefit. Just next one, thanks. So as I said, the light rail services, moving the headways to every 5 minutes and running earlier on Sundays. And again, this is in addition to services that have already been added to the line. You're probably also aware of the recent announcement by the ACT and federal governments about the construction of the Mitchell stop, and there'll be more information coming out from the government about that as it proceeds. And next one is information for passengers. It is happening on Sunday, as I said. Our journey planners are up to date. We've got a lot of information on our website, so I encourage anyone to go there who needs it. Paper timetables are available at interchanges. And particularly for schools, a very popular thing that we have with the schools is that you can look up any school across the territory and see a transport pack for that school. The example there is Lynham High, which also indicates that stop on Northbourne Avenue that's reopened. Last one, it's just a couple of really key things that have been common through the conversations I've had, which is weekend frequencies increasing. The government's commitment is to increase in term 4. Unfortunately, one of the difficulties we've had during the COVID is that we can't train drivers because we need people to either be in a classroom or on a bus with a trainer. So that's something that unfortunately had to be scaled back through the pandemic. Again, paper timetables, libraries, My Way agents, and if you really require it, you can call out a number on 13 17 10, and the lovely folks there will get something out to you. The biggest change in the network, perhaps not that effective or make that big a change for the north, but is travelling. The Rapid 5 is now travelling a different direction. We're supplementing that with what's the Route 59, which will run every 15 minutes during the week. From the city though, the Rapid 2 and the Rapid 6 run to Barton, and the Rapid 3 to Russell. Really frequent services. And last one there, as I said, is that a lot of student journeys won't change, but where we have been able to, and where we've been able to speak with the school communities and the schools to make some changes, we've done that. We think that that'll introduce a lot of benefits to students across the city. And that's me. So if anyone's got any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thanks, Peter. Less than 10 minutes.
Hey, not bad.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'd probably just say, like, as a regular bus user, or until the COVID shutdown has meant that I've been working from home a lot more. But as someone who catches the light rail in the morning and sort of squeezes in at the Dickson interchange, I obviously appreciate there has been sort of more services put on, but as there's more development on Northbourne, and it gets very sort of cramped by the point you get to Dickson and everyone is all just going to Civic. So it's not clear to me that even with more frequent services, it can sort of absorb or at least stop us all sort of feeling crushed like sardines in the light rail. So I'm wondering if there's any sort of thinking about having buses also go from those inner north suburbs to city in the future, if it seems like the light rail can't sort of allow for at least a reasonable amount of distance between people when they're catching it in rush hours.
Hi, sorry, my headphones cut out on me a little bit there, and I caught most of it, but I'll try and just address what you've said is that, yeah, the capacity on rail, one of the good problems to have in transport is trying to get more people, make sure you can get more people on it. But it is a challenge. I understand that the rail can continue to increase that headway as it grows, and there are provisions for that. I won't speak too much more on that because if there's further questions, I'll be very happy to get them to my light rail colleagues who can help you out there. As for distancing, we're still encouraging people to only take mostly essential travel at the moment, and we're doing a lot of information campaigns out on the network to keep people apart. From my experience, is that everyone's doing a very good job of that. We are getting a couple of buses that are starting to fill up, and we keep an eye on that and see what we can do. The rail itself is yeah, it's a challenge if they're starting to get very full, but you need to start to adjust to those. We're also doing a little bit of information to help people understand where our peaks are, so where it's most appropriate that you could travel and you could get some more space on the service.
Yeah, I guess it's just going from the previous scenario where there would be sort of a lot of buses in the inner north that would take people into the city, and now we're all sort of going onto the tram, which is, I guess, why you're getting a lot of those crowds. And obviously, reprioritizing buses is part of the new network. But I guess that's if there's any sort of future prospect of having more buses that go into the city from inner north suburbs in the future, rather than a bus that takes you to Dickson Interchange and then you get on the light rail, which is a lot longer.
Look, I think that nothing is fixed. You know, the rail is fixed, but buses are flexible, and that's one of the benefits of them. But it's a lot of dependency on how the area grows and what is the best solution at the time. I think light rail provides a lot of certainty, and we're getting the benefits of that. In the inner north, we see a lot of use. I think the 53 is one of the highest use buses on the network, which is really great. So getting that into the city the way it travels is really important for us. So yeah, look, I think I would say never as a pragmatic transport planner, but you just need to kind of balance that out to see how it works.
Peter, I was just wondering, this is probably not in your bailiwick, and I can understand the priority is Monday to Friday, but I was just wondering, I've always heard grumbles, and being an ex-schoolie too, I've heard grumbles from teenagers trying to get from one end of Canberra to the other on the weekend. So is there any forward thinking? I know we're all sort of stuck in COVID-19, but it seems to be one of those perennial thorny things that suddenly there's no buses at weekends, and yet there's definitely sporting fixtures from all over Canberra. And I'm sure it's not a high priority, but it's just one of those things that I think, no doubt, quite a number of parents would be really appreciative too if the kids could get to these events. Yeah, no, thank you. So,
so the weekends are definitely a priority. And I was saying is that one of the disappointing things in COVID is that with driver training slowing down, is we've had to reassess how that looks, and also while we're balancing I keep forgetting the word for this. It's essential travel. That's essential travel. So we're trying to balance that forward. It's a really tough time in the transport industry around the world, of course, and you can see that our colleagues in Melbourne are having a hell of a time at the moment. With the weekends, look, what we know is that there's more weekend service than ever. Still, we'd like to continue to increase that, and there's more ridership than ever. So I think particularly with young people, really impressive numbers of how many young people. I say young people, maybe I'm not young anymore, but the kind of the teenager or the school students travelling on the weekends and using the services. It's also one of the reasons why we made the change to the Rapid 5 coming out of the Tuggeranong Valley. So it saves about 20 minutes travel time out of there. And part of that is because, of course, we want the service to be attractive and work for the community. But also the Tuggeranong Community Council has a youth forum as well, who also provided some good feedback that got through to me about they want to be able to move quicker. So providing that quicker trip on weekends as well is a real benefit too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Leon wants to say something.
Oh, sorry, I can see chat messages as well, but I can't really access them quickly if they do come through.
Okay, my question is, what's Transport Canberra's plans for reducing public transport emissions? The reason I ask is that I estimate that travel by Transport Canberra causes the same emissions as car travel per person kilometre.
Okay, so thanks, Leon. The government's actually putting forward quite a aggressive zero emission strategy for the ACT. You might be aware of the plan to move to a fully zero emissions fleet by 2040. 2040 sounds a long time away, but in terms of replacing at least 450 buses, some of them are a year old, some of them are a bit older. It's probably a much more aggressive strategy than I've seen at any other jurisdiction, certainly in Australia, where people are still putting in quite large orders of diesel buses. I believe there'll be more coming from the government on that, Leon, so I won't go too much further into it, but certainly I think that zero emissions is a very clear pathway for the ACT government, and we understand that the bus fleet is part of that, and it is one of the ones that we'd like to tackle sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well,
so just one question here. So the main emission comes from diesel buses, is that right?
So is that a question to me?
Yeah.
I would believe so. We do have 70 compressed natural gas buses in the fleet.
Okay.
But I'm not sure the new Euro 6 buses that we have, percentage, but a substantial part of the fleet is Euro 6, which is very good emission standards, but not that's more for gas emissions and not CO2. I must admit, it's not my specialist area. There is some colleagues here that could tell you a lot more about it, but that's my understanding. Yeah.
So, Leon, where do you get your information from?
From things like Transport Canberra annual reports, which used to report greenhouse emissions but don't anymore, but they do report fuel use and kilometres travelled.
Yep.
I've had to go to other places to get some other figures to make a complete estimate.
Yeah, so a lot of that data should be available there, Leon, and it should be 454 buses running about 27 million kilometres a year. Actually, which will be increasing, so we'll keep an eye on that too.
Yeah.
As the frequency increases, of course, we'll have more kilometres and bus hours on the road.
Can I ask Peter? I often see buses that say they're one of 60 new buses.
Mm-hmm.
They don't say they're one of 60 additional buses. How many additional buses have we had in the last 5 years, say?
He's testing the memory a little bit there, Chris. Is it? I think the fleet has grown from about 432 to about 456. But I might take that one on notice. I'd be happy to come back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Any other questions to Peter before we move on? Thanks, folks. So can I thank and thanks, Peter, for that presentation. So can I ask Canberra Health Service to give us their update on the Dickson Walk-in Centre?
Sure.
So thanks for having me. I'll take off then.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
So it's Kathy O'Neill here, not David, as it says on the screen. I'll just get my slide pack up. So thank you for your time tonight. I'm here to give you a bit of an update on what's happening with the Dickson Community Health Centre and the creation of the Inner North Walk-in Centre. So the walk-in centres are not new to Canberra now. Dickson will be our 5th walk-in centre, but for those of you that might not be familiar with it, they provide free and efficient access to treatment and health advice for one-off minor injuries and illnesses on a no appointment walk-in basis. They're open 365 days a year from 7:30 in the morning to 10 p.m. at night. There's no cost to the consumers. All the costs are covered by the ACT government. The walk-in centres are nurse-led, but they're led by very senior nurses. So we have nurse practitioners, which is the highest clinical level of nurses that we have in Australia, and supported by advanced practice nurses. We don't treat children under 2 years old. People have complex and chronic conditions. So what are we doing in Dickson? We're refurbishing and reinvigorating the Community Health Centre and adding in the new walk-in centre. As I said, it's the 5th walk-in centre, and I can confirm it will open at the end of August this year. So those of you that are familiar with the Dickson Community Health Centre, we're maintaining the services that were there, which is podiatry and foot care and the maternal and child health. Physio moved out of Dickson some time ago, and the walk-in centre is going into that part of the centre. Those other services moved out to allow us to do the refurbishment, and they will move back in. We'll do a bit of a staggered recommencement of services, starting off with the walk-in centre. It's one of our beautiful old Canberra architectural sites. It's Some would argue it's not the most attractive from the outside, but it's got beautiful natural light on the inside, and we've been able to manage to retain that. So these are just a couple of views, but you'll be more familiar with this. I've just put this up just to show you that we've gone through all of the planning. I don't really expect you to be able to understand that from the distance. What's missing from there is the match service, which spreads out to the right. The match services, the maternal and child health services, were refurbished about 2 years ago, so we're not really touching that area. The budget that we got was really just to create the walk-in centre, but we've managed to stretch the budget to do a refurbishment of the facilities. And we were also lucky enough to get some of the recent government stimulus money so that we could do a complete job about that. You might be familiar that the GP used to practice from that centre. He retired just before we started this work, so we've managed to redevelop that area as well, which has allowed us to create a nice waiting area and also some staff facilities. This is the artist's impression. Unfortunately, the photos I could have got to give you a bit of an update have still got too much building material around but we've managed to maintain that beautiful skylight and the timber ceilings. We had a bit of a struggle to make sure that that complied with current infection control policies, but we've managed to find a coating to put over the timber to meet infection control. So we've managed to maintain the timber. So some of the services our walk-in centres provide: cuts, braces, abrasions and burns. The nurses can suture if required. We see a lot of presentations for cold and flu, sinus infections, ear infections, but the nurses can also treat strains and sprains and also minor limb fractures. So they can organise for x-rays to be taken, they can apply plasters, they can also remove plasters at the end of the healing period. And we treat a whole range of infections. And as I mentioned, the podiatry and maternal and child health will move back into the service. Just to give you a bit of an idea of some of our numbers. So since we've been doing the COVID testing, that comes under my program of the walk-in centre, so you can see some numbers there. This was up to the 7th of July, and we've done several thousand more COVID tests since then. But it's just interesting to see the volume of people that are coming through our walk-in centres. They are very, very popular with the community. I think the hours of operation, the ease of access and the comprehensive care that the nurses provide makes them very, very popular with the community. We have an ACT Health app. Hopefully you've all downloaded this. The health app allows you to see the relative wait times for each of the walk-in centres and also for the 2 hospital emergency departments. So if you're wondering where to go, where's going to give you the shortest wait time, you can certainly hop onto this app. It will also give you some information about the types of conditions that can be treated at the different centres. I've just got a couple of slides in here about the COVID testing. So things have evolved since then. We've been running the respiratory assessment clinic at Canberra Hospital. We actually closed that one down last week, and we've moved into the surge centre on Garran Oval, and we've been running a COVID testing centre there since last Saturday. In March this year, we converted our Western Walk-in Centre, which had only been open a couple of months. We converted that completely to a respiratory assessment clinic for COVID testing and also for support and treatment of people with COVID diagnosis. And that's proving to be quite a successful approach. That centre's also been providing all of the in-reach support to the quarantined flights. And our Epic drive-through has been extremely popular. The last 2 weeks, we've seen the highest number of cars coming through there. The team out there have been doing an amazing job, and we're looking to open up an additional drive-through in the southern part of Canberra next week. We're just waiting to confirm a site there. And in addition to the Canberra Health Services sites, there's also 3 other Commonwealth-funded services where you can get your COVID testing. Just some of our feedback. As I said, it's extremely popular, the walk-in centres. So some really nice. I'm one of the lucky executive directors at Canberra Health Services. I get lots and lots of compliments, and most of them come from the walk-in centres. This was a case. Little Rafe came to us with a fractured arm about 2 weeks ago, and they were so impressed they wanted to share a photo of him and asked us to share that on social media just at the time I was putting together these slides. So I thought I'd share this with you. One of the things that we've struggled a little bit with is we've used the term minor illness and injury, but the term minor is pretty subjective. So one of the things we're starting to try to do with some of our media is to really give the public an understanding that what some people might consider serious, such as a broken arm, is actually something that we can quite safely manage in our walk-in centres. So the timelines for Dickson, the construction's well underway. We're looking to take handover back from the builders in the next couple of weeks. The official opening at this stage is planned for the 24th and the 25th of August. We're just waiting for confirmation from the Minister's office, and we'll take our first patients in the walk-in centre on the 26th of August. And then podiatry will move in the week after that, and the maternal and child health services the week following. So that's my slides. I'm more than happy to take questions.
Thanks heaps for your brief and succinct introduction. I have one question immediately. Do you have data on how much these walk-in centres relieve the emergency departments of hospitals?
Look, it's a bit difficult to draw a direct cause and effect. What we have seen as the walk-in centre presentations have gone up, we've certainly seen a decline in the number of triage category 5 presentations at the emergency department, which are the least serious presentations. We certainly think, and people tell us that if they hadn't come to the walk-in centre, they would have gone to the emergency department. But we also know that demand for the emergency centre is growing at the same time. So it's not that we're seeing an overall reduction in emergency department numbers, but we certainly know we're taking some of the pressure off them.
Any questions, folks?
I've got a question. Thanks very much. That was really interesting. And it's a beautiful building. That's an Enrico Tagliati on a very, very low budget. So what you've done actually looks great. I did have a question about parking that's going to be needed.
Yeah, sure. So as you'd be aware that there is a small dedicated car park there for the walk-in centre. We've done a bit of work in the car park to increase the number of disabled parking spots there, but parking will need to flow into the public car park across the road. As you appreciate, we're sort of a bit landlocked in that site there, so we couldn't really expand our own parking. And just on the Tagliati story, one of the things we've managed to do is we try to put a bit of artwork in all of our new builds, and often on a very tight budget, but you may or may not be aware that Enrico's daughter actually lives in the area and is a jeweller and has started to do more sculptural work. So we've commissioned her to do a 3D, it's like a sort of an open screen that will sit in the reception area, and it's a bright yellow, and it's absolutely lovely. So we're very much looking forward to sort of showcasing that and have that story live on.
That's great.
Any other questions?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. Early on, before the walk-in centres became established, settled down, etc., etc., there was some statistics about the cost per patient compared to the cost of going to a GP. Has that settled down? Can you tell us any more about those statistics?
Yes, so I can't give you an exact cost per unit. I'm waiting to get the latest figures on that, but the costs to run the walk-in centres are relatively fixed. So as we see the presentation numbers go up, certainly the cost per unit is coming down. And there's, it comes down to the fragmented way healthcare is funded in Australia. So the GPs are actually funded through the Commonwealth Government. The ACT Government is funding this. When the walk-in centres were first created in Canberra, it was when we actually had a significant shortage of GPs across the ACT. So it was actually quite a bold step for the ACT Government to sort of jump into this space. And they've proved to be so popular and so successful that their government has continued to support them. But I am hoping to be able to publicly release the latest per unit cost, but it's certainly reduced significantly from the original figures quoted.
Any other questions?
Just one from me. Congratulations, it was a good presentation, and it's a terrific initiative, and also really good to see the Tagliati building being used in that way. It's fantastic. Just wondering about waiting times. You mentioned that it's on the waiting times in a particular moment are on the app, and I haven't heard of the app before, so I'll download that. But the given that it's not an appointment-based thing, what sorts of waiting times do people experience?
So the average waiting time is about 29 minutes. But that's averaged across the full opening hours and 7 days a week. So we have our peaks and troughs. So at times, the waiting time might be up to 2 hours. We certainly try to keep it well under the 1 hour. And that's why we advise people to look at the app, because particularly if you're coming by car and you've got the option to go to a different centre, it's always worthwhile hopping on and just seeing. Or if it's not a particular urgent visit, just waiting till some of those peak times pass. So certainly the evenings are quieter for us. We find Mondays and Tuesdays are busier. So it's variable.
One last question. Where is the beautiful library you are sitting in?
Oh, it's one of those...
Fake.
Yes, it's magic of digital background.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, thanks heaps.
Pleasure. All right, I'll leave you to your meeting.
Thanks.